Have you ever noticed, those of you who have children, that as your children are young and small and you're watching them grow up, that they have very different personalities, very different characteristics from the other children in your family? My mother and father used to, from the time I can remember, probably 4 or 5 years of age, they used to call me bullheaded, stubborn. I just chalked it up to determination. But they would always, and I hear this ringing in my ears, they would always say, Terry just can't take no for an answer. He's very stubborn, he's bullheaded. And it's true, when I start working on a project, there's just like, it's rare that I stop. I just want to keep going to a solution, and I can be very stubborn. I watch my own children grow up, and my daughter, in many ways, was just like me. Feisty, stubborn, a little difficult at times. Her brother was completely opposite. You know, he was easy to get along with, he kind of went with the flow and everything else. Now, can you imagine that if you were able, by God's grace, to predict all of your descendants and what they would do, and what their strengths and their personality and their quirks and even their weaknesses would be? Well, we come to a chapter in Genesis 49 today. We have one more sermon in Genesis 50 coming up next week, and then we're done with the book. But as we're doing this series on Foundations Revisited, we find out that Jacob comes to bless the 12 tribes of Israel. And as he blesses the 12 tribes of Israel, he describes each of his sons. And it's, at some points, a very, very positive description and blessing, and at other points, a very honest evaluation of the weaknesses of those sons. And we're going to look at that today, because that's part of a foundation for society. Jacob knew, by God's grace and by God's revelation, more so than you and I would know about our descendants or be able to predict about our descendants. Jacob knew what they would become based on God's revelation to him and his walk with God. And so he blesses the future of these 12 tribes and talks about them in Genesis 49. And as we're looking at that, I want to pick it up in Genesis 49:1. Then Jacob called for his sons and said, "Gather around me so I can tell you what will happen to you in the days to come." Jacob, or Israel, is about to die. "Assemble and listen, my son. Listen, sons of Jacob. Listen to your father Israel." And then he starts with his firstborn, Reuben. He says, "You are my firstborn, my might, the first sign of my strength, excelling in honor, excelling in power." Talks a little bit about Reuben's personality and his style. "For you went up," but turbulent as waters. This is a concept of boiling waters. "You will no longer excel." This is the negative part. "For you went up onto your father's bed, onto my couch, and defiled it." I'll explain that in just a moment. Jacob never forgot Reuben's violation of his servant. If you look at the descendants of Jacob, and if you look at Rachel, the one that he loved the most over Leah, and you see the descendants here, Leah had Reuben, but Reuben ended up getting involved with Rachel's servant, Bilhah, and that's how that situation was defiled. Now I want to show you the 12 tribes, and I did this the other week, but I want to show you where the tribe of Reuben will be settled in the future. And it's a little hard to read on here. I'm looking for Reuben down here on the other side of the Dead Sea. And you're going to see some changes as we get to the future on that. But Reuben is down here, and what would this area be today, right in here? Anybody know? This would probably be on the other side of the Dead Sea, Jordan, up in here anyway. You know, one of the things that's happening right now in our world is the Jordanians, because they've had a bad experience with the Palestinians, won't let them in, just like Egypt tends to be giving them a hard time. So all of this history is very, very current. The Bible Knowledge Commentary, and I apologize in advance, I leaned heavily on the Bible Knowledge Commentary today. There are many quotes from it, and the reason being it's one of the best two-volume sets you could ever get as a commentary on the Bible. But the Bible Knowledge Commentary said Jacob heaped praise upon Reuben, his firstborn, which collapsed when he announced that Reuben had defiled his father's couch. Clearly a reference to Reuben's adultery with Jacob's concubine Bilhah. Reuben was entitled to leadership and a double inheritance as the firstborn, but because he had ungoverned impulses of boiling water, turbulent waters, he would fail in leadership. That was Jacob's prediction through God's message. In the time of the judges, later on it would come, the tribe of Reuben was characterized by irresolution. In other words, hesitancy, inconsistency, couldn't make up their mind. Now he goes to Simeon and Levi are brothers. Their swords are weapons of violence. He's describing them. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly. This is something to say about your children, right? I mean, if you have children that turn out badly, it's hard to admit it as a parent. And here is Jacob, under the inspiration of God, being as honest as he possibly can. And he says, their swords are weapons of violence. Let me not enter their council. Let me not join their assembly. For they have killed men in their anger and hamstrung oxen as they please. Cursed be their anger so fierce and their fury so cruel. I will scatter them in Jacob and disperse them in Israel. And so again, we're going to look for Simeon. Look what happens to Simeon. Do you understand what's happening? This is the tribe of Judah that completely surrounds Simeon. And this all comes from Joshua, about chapter 19 or so. And it's the allotment, the portion of the land that is talked about as they go into the land under Joshua. But so you have Simeon, and then Levi. Somebody find Levi for me? If I can't read it, you must be having a hard time reading it. But I'll show you an easier one on the future of Levi in a minute. And you got to remember, the Levites were part of the priestly clan. Simeon and Levi were men of anarchy or violence and not justice, men of uncontrolled anger and fury with disregard for men and animals. Here was God's moral judgment on their slaughter of the Shechemites. God distinguishes holy war from the vengeance. Both tribes were later scattered. Simeon was largely disintegrated with its land inside that of Judah. But Levi was afforded an honorable dispersion because it was the priestly tribe. But if you remember, Simeon and Levi got angry because of what happened with their sister Dinah and the Shechemites. And remember, they made a deal with the Shechemites to have them all circumcised. And when they were in the pain of their circumcision, they came in and they slaughtered them. That's why Simeon and Levi, Jacob says, are violent individuals. And it followed in the tribe. Now I want to show you the towns for Levi, because Levi did not get a specific as the priests, they didn't get a specific piece of territory. What they got were a series of towns. This is from Joshua 21. And so they were ministering priests, and so they would be up here in the tribe of Asher or Naphtali or the half-tribe of Manasseh. And each of these dots represents a city in that area that were Levitical cities, all the way down to Dan and Judah and Simeon and Reuben. And there were, I don't remember exactly how many, but there were probably about, I don't know, 30 or 40 or more cities that were there. Here's how it's distributed. Actually, 48 Levitical cities that there were. But these are the names of all the cities distributed throughout that the Levites had, and they would be ministering priests in the area so that you didn't have to go all the way to Jerusalem. You're going to see some things that change in the future. And then also, they would have the cities of refuge. Kadesh, Golan, Ramoth, Bezer, Shechem, Hebron. The cities of refuge were designed that if you accidentally killed someone, murdered someone, you could flee to that city of refuge and no one could touch you. Now, if it was premeditated murder, there was no city of refuge for you. But if it was just something that you were out in the field and you know, your axe accidentally, the handle flew off and it killed your neighbor, that was an unintentional killing, that you could go to these cities of refuge, but you could never come out of them because the avenger of death would come and kill you. It was a strange situation of justice, but it was a system of justice that God had instituted. We'll go to Judah. Judah, your brothers will praise you. In verse 8, your hand will be on the neck of your enemies. Your father's sons will bow down to you. You are a lion cub, Judah. You return from the prey, my son. Like a lion, he crouches and lies down, like a lioness who dares to rouse him. So remember, Judah, the tribe of Judah, guess who comes from Judah? Jesus Christ does. And that's an all-important thing. So when you come down here, this very, very large portion is Judah, and it's near the area of, right on the bottom of Jerusalem, although Benjamin covers the area of Jerusalem there. And then in Genesis chapter 49, as we've been looking, there's a pause, there's a break in here about the tribe of Judah. And it predicts the coming of Messiah through Judah. This is a major prophecy about the coming of Jesus Christ in the future as ruler and reign, King of Kings and Lord of Lords. Verse 10, the scepter, you know what a scepter is what a king carries, will not depart from Judah. In other words, they will be entitled to the crown, to reign. Nor the ruler's staff from between his feet, until he to whom it belongs shall come, and the obedience of the nations shall be his. Talking about the future millennial kingdom with Jesus Christ. He will tether his donkey to a vine, his colt to the choicest branch. He will wash his garments in wine, his robes in the blood of grapes. His eyes will be darker than wine, his teeth whiter than milk. Jacob predicted a fierce lion-like dominance of Judah over his enemies and over his brothers who would praise him. A wordplay was made here on the name Judah, which means, Judah means praise. So we know that Jesus, coming from the tribe of Judah, deserves all praise. The oracle pivots on the word until, that's why I underlined it in the previous slide. When the promised one who will rule the nation appears, the scene will become an earthly paradise. So there's a great future for the tribe of Judah. These verses anticipate the kingship in Judah culminating in the reign of Messiah, in which nations will obey him. That did not happen when Jesus walked on the earth. He did not become king of Rome. He did not become the head of Israeli government. He didn't do any of those things. He was simply crucified. So this has got to be fulfilled yet from Genesis 49. Zebulun will live by the seashore and become a haven for ships. His borders will extend towards Sidon. And that's up in the north. And if you see, Zebulun is right up here in this area. And they had a lot to do with shipping agent, the shipping business. Zebulun would be enriched by seaborne trade, though it did not actually border the Mediterranean Sea. So here is Jacob predicting the future, and this future became a reality because God was behind it for these 12 tribes. Issachar is a raw-boned donkey. Now, there you go. That's your kids again. You know? Would you call your child a raw-boned donkey? Maybe you have, in other words, in the past, and maybe they have of you. But a raw-boned donkey lying down among the sheep pens, a little lazy. When he sees how good is his resting place and how pleasant is his land, he will bend his shoulder to the burden and submit to forced labor. That was the character. And you say to yourself, well, why do I care about all of this? Well, number one, you're going to see some of this in the future. You've seen some of this throughout history. Jacob knew this was going to happen. And it is part of what builds a society. The kind of children you have. Now, aside from their personality quirks and other things like that, but the generations that we produce and what they value and what their characteristics are makes a big, big difference in the foundation of the society. And again, we have, if I can find it, Issachar should be up in here. It's one of these little ones. Right around here. Issachar would be forced to work for others. Issachar, located in the fertile, broad, pleasant plain of Esarhaddon, was often subject to invading armies. So they got beat up a lot. Dan will provide justice for his people as one of the tribes of Israel. Dan will be a snake by the roadside, a viper along the path that bites the horse's heels so that its rider tumbles backward. I look for your deliverance, O Lord. Now, can you imagine that? Can you imagine that let's say Jacob put all of these little sayings in a Chinese fortune cookie. And all the brothers got together. And they opened their cookie and they started to read it. Can you imagine the reaction? You know, some of them would say, well, yeah, my descendants are going to be pretty good. I'm pretty good. Someone would say, oh, you know what? I'm lazy. I'm violent. Whatever. And yet God kind of nailed their characteristics through Jacob. And again, Dan, I believe, is right over here along the coast. And later on, you will see them very much on the north. Dan shows another disparity between calling and achievement. Dan was called to great things, but Dan was to provide justice. The name Dan means judge. But the tribe chose treachery like a snake by the roadside. In the time of the judges, the first major practice of idolatry among the tribes of Israel appeared in the tribe of Dan. So they were the first to forsake and not achieve their goal. Gad would be attacked by a band of raiders, but he will attack them at their heels. So Gad would fight back. Again, Gad's over here on the other side on the eastern side. It's interesting, in the millennial kingdom, there are no tribes on the eastern side of the Dead Sea, or the Sea of Galilee, or the Jordan River. 3 of the 6 Hebrew words in verse 19 are a play on the name Gad. Gad means attack. Gad will be attacked by a raid of attackers, but he will attack back. The verb gadad means to break into or to attack. Border raids were often experienced by the tribes settled east of the Jordan River because those raids and raiders could come over very easily on that undefendable side there on that eastern side of the Jordan River. Asher's food will be rich, verse 20. He will provide delicacies for a king. And again, where do we have Asher? Asher, all the way up here along the coast. All right? And then there's Naphtali, of course. Asher would be fertile and productive up there along the coast, providing rich food. That tribe settled along the rich northern coast of Canaan. Naphtali is a doe set free that bears beautiful fawns. So Naphtali, they said, you're going to have beautiful children. And again, where we were before, Naphtali is right up there next to Asher in the apportionment of the land in Joshua. Naphtali, like a doe, would be a free mountain people. Deborah, who was from Naphtali, sang of the people of Naphtali risking their lives on the heights of the field. Remember, Deborah was one of the judges in the book of Judges. That tribe settled northwest of the Sea of Kinnereth, or the Sea of Galilee. Now, before I bore you too much, we're going to get to the point. We only have a little bit to go. Joseph is a fruitful vine near a spring whose branches climb over a wall. With bitterness, archers attacked him. They shot at him with hostility, but his bow remained steady, his strong arm stayed limber. But Joseph, you don't find any tribe, right? Do you see any land apportionment for Joseph? No, it's because in the last chapter, 48, Jacob said, I am going to take the 2 sons born to you, Joseph, in Egypt, Manasseh and Ephraim, and they are going to be like my sons. So instead of giving an apportionment to Joseph, they ended up with this double portion on the east and west side of the Jordan River for Manasseh. This would be called the half-tribe of Manasseh that stayed over there. And Ephraim, Joseph's sons, born in Egypt. Now, right in the middle of this, Jacob worships. And he talks about some great names for God, for the God of Jacob and Joseph. And he says this, because of the hand of the mighty one of Jacob, because of the shepherd, all these names, the rock of Israel, because of your father's God who helps you, because of the Almighty who blesses you with blessings of the skies above, blessings of the deep springs below, blessings of the breast and womb. Your father's blessings are greater than the blessings of the ancient mountains, that the bounty of the age-old hills. Let them all rest on the head of Joseph, on the brow of the prince among his brothers. So this was a great blessing. This oracle treats Joseph more lavishly than any of the others, for here the main blessing lay. Joseph took up the promise of fruitfulness from the name of Joseph's son Ephraim, which means fruitful, and lavished the promise of victory and prosperity on Joseph's 2 tribes. Victory in battle was experienced by Joshua, Deborah, and Samuel, all of the tribe of Ephraim, and by Gideon and Jephthah, both of Manasseh's tribes, in the time of the judges. Benjamin, finally, the youngest, is a ravenous wolf. In the morning he devours the prey, in the evening he divides the plunder. All these are the 12 tribes of Israel, and this is what their father said to them when he blessed them, giving each the blessing. You see that next word? Appropriate to him. So he had some insight from God. All right? Don't be afraid to be honest with your children. If it's honest and it's negative, they may reject it. But also, don't use negative names for your children, because it sticks with them. If you tell someone when they're growing up that they are not very smart, and you keep telling them, they will tend to live up to that. You know, I had a complex in high school. I couldn't do math. I mean, I could do the simple math. I still can do the simple math. But when you got into advanced algebra and calculus and all the formulas and stuff like that, and I had myself convinced I couldn't do those things. I could do geometry. Geometry was great. Worked great with shapes and things. But what you say to your kids, you don't want to lie to them. You don't want to tell them they're something when they're not. We don't want to be giving trophies to every kid just because they show up. That's not healthy for them either. But you also don't want to wear them down with negative name calling. So think of things. I've been around parents in stores and things like that, and some of the things they say to their children, I can't even imagine what those kids go through. Giving each a blessing appropriate to him. Honest blessing. And then you have the tribe of Benjamin down there around the area of Jerusalem. So what's the big deal with all of this? The oracle about Benjamin describes a tribe violent in spirit, a ravenous, devouring wolf. The cruel Benjamites in Judges 20, and Saul, remember? He was a Benjamite, and he murdered Christians before he came to Jesus Christ in the New Testament. And also King Saul, I believe, was a Benjamite. The death of Jacob. Then he gave them these instructions. I am about to be gathered to my people. Bury me with my fathers in the cave in the field of Ephron the Hittite, the cave in the field of Machpelah near Mamre in Canaan, which Abraham bought along with the field as a burial place from Nephron the Hittite. There Abraham and his wife Sarah were buried. There Isaac and his wife Rebekah were buried. There I buried Leah. The field and the cave in it were bought from the Hittites. So that's where Jacob was to be buried. When Jacob had finished giving instructions to his son, he drew his feet up into his bed, breathed his last, and was gathered to his people. He passed away. So Jacob died after 147 years of struggle. His sorrow came to an end. Infirmities, he had many. Sins, not a few. But Jacob had an unquenchable desire for God's blessing. He had learned some lessons of faith. He had a deep piety that habitually relied on God in spite of all else. In the end, he died as a man of genuine faith. He learned in his life where the real blessings came from, and he fought with God and man to be privileged to hand them on to his sons. So he blessed his sons. Now there's one other thing we need to look at, because there's something that's going to happen in the future. And Ezekiel chapter 48, we're not going to get into it, but the land allotment for the tribes in the millennial kingdom in Israel is completely different than what I just showed you on all those maps. And here's what I want to show you. When Jesus Christ comes back to rule and reign for 1,000 years, and incidentally, in Revelation chapter 20, there are 6 references to a literal 1,000 years rule and reign of Jesus Christ. So people who would say, well, that millennial kingdom, that 1,000-year reign is just allegorical, is just spiritual, and that we are in it now, they're wrong. And Ezekiel goes so far in chapter 48 to say, here's the land allotment when Jesus Christ comes back. And I want to show it to you. And it goes basically north to south, all right? And there is some on the western side, the eastern side of the Sea of Galilee here. But it kind of stops here at the Jordan River. But I want you to understand something. When we start, Dan is at the very north, Asher, Naphtali. Now, do you see this right here? That's Damascus. Where's Damascus today? It's in Syria. So the future is going to be partially in Syria and up here in Lebanon as well. It's not going to take over the complete space there, but some of it, and Christ will rule and reign in that way. And then Ephraim here around the Sea of Galilee, Reuben, Judah near Jerusalem, Benjamin, Simeon, Issachar, Zebulun, and Gad down there. And it runs farther down, down by Kadesh Barnea, down by the brook of Egypt, so quite a ways and into some of Egypt's territory. Now this space right here is interesting because that's the space around Jerusalem. And I'll show you an enlargement of this in a second. But right there is the city of Jerusalem and the sanctuary, the temple, right in there. And then there's something, these P's on either side, they're the prince's portion. Now we don't know whether that's Christ or David ruling as king or human princes ruling in that area. And the X's are areas of agriculture for food and city workers around Jerusalem. But I want you to see this. The central band of land was allotted to the prince, David, the priests, and the Levites. That central portion will also include the city of Jerusalem and its suburbs. So that's the future. And this is what it's going to look like as part of the tribe of Judah. Here's the area of the Levites. Here's the area of the Zadok priests. They will be part of the temple thing, but the Levites will be priests that will support the temple work. And this is farmland on the other side of the city, and here's Jerusalem. And so you see the area. And the area, I don't remember exactly, but it's, 3 or 4 miles large there around that. But that central area is for the priests at Jerusalem. Now, as we close, I want to suggest to you, God is the mighty God who makes and keeps promises based on his name. He did this through Abraham, Isaac, Jacob, Joseph. Names such as the mighty one of Jacob, the shepherd, the rock of Israel, your father's God, the Almighty, El Shaddai. And then finally, God has a plan to bring peace on earth through Israel, the tribe of Judah as well, and the return of Jesus Christ, the Messiah. So the next thing that's going to happen, if the rapture doesn't happen today, and there's nothing in God's timetable that prevents the rapture from happening, but the next thing that's going to happen here on earth is that somewhere along the line, someone is going to come along and strike a peace treaty with Israel and all of their enemies, and everybody's going to rejoice in that. Everybody, even the Israelites, they're going to think it's wonderful. And for 3.5 years, it's going to be okay. And then at the end of the 3.5 years, that treaty is going to be broken. That person who makes it is known as the Antichrist. Christ talked about him. Christ talked about the abomination of desolation that's going to be set up in the temple. So the temple has to be around by then. And that treaty is going to be broken. And literally, all hell is going to break loose. You and I are not going to be here if we know Jesus Christ as our Savior. The rapture will have already taken place. But the reality is everybody's going to cheer a peace treaty. What are they looking for right now? We're looking for a peace treaty. We're looking for a ceasefire. I don't know if it's now or 1,000 years from now or 500 years from now. I can't tell you that. And anybody who tells you that doesn't know what they're talking about from the scriptures. But God does have that plan. And it will come to reality. And you and I will walk around Jerusalem, and we'll go to the north, and we'll visit the tribe of Dan, and we'll go to the south, all the way down by the border of Egypt. We'll be able to do that in our glorified bodies. And that's what keeps me going. That's what excites me.